Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to St John O'Groat Hospital. Damien O'Dowd is my name. And you're welcome to the second in our series of public lectures this year, Healthy Communications in Family Relationships. Education events such as this evening are part of what St John O'Groat Hospital does to reduce and assist in reducing stigma and to assist people with mental health problems and their families. We continually try to raise awareness by media engagement, lectures, social media and through research and publications, and also by offering evidence-based care to those who need it most. We also provide mental health first aid training across the country in clubs, colleges, businesses and community groups. We believe that talking about our mental health and sharing information is to the benefit of everyone in society. So back to this evening's proceedings, and before I introduce our speakers for this evening, I'd like to point out some health and safety and housekeeping matters. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please note there are two exit routes from this hall. The first is the door you came in at the back of the hall, and the second is to your left here at the top of the hall. Both sets of doors lead out to externally out of the building. I'd ask if you have a mobile phone to either turn it off or to turn it to silent, please. Tonight's event will also be live streamed and it will also be available thereafter on our website. The format for this evening is as follows. The talk from Scott should take approximately 45 to 50 minutes. There will then be a short interval during which time the question sheet on your chair, so you'll see a little white sheet on the chair where you are. You can, if you wish to ask questions, you can hand that to a member of staff and it'll be given to the panel just for a Q&A session after the interval. We plan to finish the evening by 9 p.m. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers and chairpersons for their time and input, and to thank everyone who's assisted in the preparation and organisation of our public lecture series this year. So it's my pleasure to introduce our chair for the evening, Orla Donoghue. Orla is a qualified occupational therapist with over 35 years' experience in mental health. Orla is also a certified stress management and relaxation trainer and a registered mindfulness teacher. Orla is a member of the Association of Occupational Therapists of Ireland, the Irish Mindfulness Teachers Association, the Institute of Mindfulness-Based Approaches, and she's registered with Corru. Orla is head of our occupational therapy services here at St John O'Groat Hospital, where she oversees the running and development of the various inpatient wellness and recovery programmes with her team of occupational therapists and specialist instructors. And as needs dictate, she also manages a clinical caseload and facilitates groups on a weekly basis. Her specialist interest areas are lifestyle balance, meaningful engagement, mindfulness and relaxation. Orla previously worked in inpatient psychiatry and in child and adolescent psychiatry in the UK. On returning to Ireland, she also headed up in both community and inpatient mental health as head of occupational therapy services in the previously known Eastern Health Board, or what is now known as the HSE. And she's worked for several years in the Dublin County Stress Clinic. Orla also lectures in Trinity College, Faculty of Health Sciences, both as staff and a visiting lecturer. So I'll hand you over to Orla Donoghue, our chair this evening. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Damien. That was a rather long introduction. I said it was a cut and paste. It's a generic for all eventualities. So yes, it's my very great honour to introduce you to our speaker this evening, Scott, one of my esteemed colleagues in our social work department. We have a very vibrant social work department here in the hospital. I think we have 9 social workers in all. And we work interdisciplinary, which means, there's no one discipline. Everybody needs to work together so that the individuals get a full picture and all the inputs that they need. Scott himself has 17 years experience in working in social work. He came to us from the HSE, where he's had a very rounded experience, and has been with us now for 9 years. He has worked in our addictions unit, and is now currently working in our adolescent unit. And also during the course of that time, and very relevant for this evening, Scott also trained as a systemic family therapist. So he's going to bring that richness of experience from all his clinical work, but also from his systemic, can't even say the word now this evening, systemic family therapy work to help us navigating this whole area of healthy communication in family relationships. And even listening to this evening's news, you know, it's so pertinent in how we all relate to each other within our homes, in our community, in the world at large. So it is a very important topic for each and every one of us. And one of the things that Scott himself is actually really passionate about and believes is that while not all problems can be solved, that healthy relationships can go a very good way in helping us to manage and even thrive in whatever life has to offer us. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time and hand it over to Scott.
Great, thanks Orla and Damien. It's great to get your bio as well. I didn't know all those details too. 35 years.
I know, yeah. Started when I was 10.
So yeah, no, it's great to be here. And as Orla said, I am really passionate about human relationships. In my work as a social worker every day, I'm working with people with loads of different struggles and as a family therapist. And often relationships are a real mixture, aren't they? They're a mixture of support and stress. And often my role is to sort of maximize the support in those relationships and maybe minimize as best we can the stress. I know as well like that a lot of research is more and more going into what, you know, healthy relationships are so important. There's a lot of research now with healthy relationships are really good for your physical body. That it lowers blood pressure when you're in a happy relationship. It lowers risks of cardiovascular disease. And also, of course, healthy relationships help with our mental health. They've done studies that in a healthy relationship, your stress hormones are reduced. It creates a great opportunity in relationships, and you need a bit of stress in a relationship because that allows you to learn from one another, and that learning increases self-awareness and growth. So yeah, relationships are so important, and I suppose my purpose tonight is really to look at three kind of areas. It's just to kind of talk about communication and give you, we all know really what communication is, but just to put a bit of language on it and to articulate it and maybe reflect on it together tonight. Then we'll also look about just family relationships, just some key points that I've learned has been very helpful for me to understand relationships. When I say family, you know, like a mixture of what we call our family of origin, the families we've brought up with, but also our new families that we create. And also as well, family can also mean not necessarily biological family, but our very close friends can also be like a family to us too. And then just some principles. I'll end with some kind of 4 or 5 kind of principles for healthy communication. It's a very complex area in some ways, and every relationship is different, and we bring our own differences, personality-wise, different histories and relationships, but just some key principles that hopefully you guys can take away with you that I use in my personal life, that I use professionally, and hopefully that will be maybe some helpful ideas for you to work through. So what is communication? I'm going to show a video for 40 minutes. No, only for 2 minutes. Why am I here? It's a video from YouTube that I got down. It's a video called the Still Face Experiment. And it's a video just about an experiment between a mother and her daughter. And it's really interesting because it's just 2 minutes long of this psychologist who introduces it. And I suppose the point I want to make is he narrates this sort of clip. He never mentions the word communication in it. But I'd encourage you to just listen to the clip now, watch it, and see from your perspective where communication is happening. So hopefully this will work now.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 34 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. And the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I don't like girl.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
So yeah, I think the mother's pretty impressive there to tolerate that experiment. So yeah, like he didn't mention the word communication at all in that, but at such a young age, the baby's only about 1, you can see how the baby and the mother are communicating all the time there. It's interesting, he said here, where did I quote it here? Yeah, the mum and baby are working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions on what they want to do in the world. So, yeah, I always find that quite a powerful thing, the contrast between the two, kind of one, the baby and the mother, they're kind of coordinating, they're in time with one another, one's smiling, the other's smiling, one's pointing, the other's pointing, there's all this connection. And then one, when disconnects and they're not in tune, you can see all the different kind of behaviours there. So in some ways, communication is relational. It takes at least 2, doesn't it? Like, you can't communicate just yourself. You have to have someone at least there. So, and it takes 2 to have healthy communication. You know, that's really important to emphasize. It's not just words. And in a way, that's why I put you through that trauma of watching that baby get upset, was to sort of make the we know that, we hear all that kind of cliche that, you know, most of communication isn't words. But I think even just seeing that, here's a baby with very few words, and the mum not using many words, and yet they were communicating so well when they were interacting with so it's not just words. And when there was a disruption in the communication, again, there wasn't words being used, but we could tell from that. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, communication has a significant impact on our well-being. You can even see in that moment in the clip where the baby was completely turned away, was almost gave up on communication. I know for many of us in difficult relationships, that's almost how we can feel at times as well. So yeah, so it's not just an exchange information. It's how people connect and interact and allowing them to build relationships and solve problems and share experiences. As I say, good communication, healthy communication allows us to do these things. I suppose I remember in my studies as a family therapist, they were quoted this famous guy, I can't remember his name now, in the 70s, and he had wrote a book on communication. I think it's called The Pragmatics of Communication. But he had this fact, and it's kind of debatable, but it's kind of, I think, 99% true. He says that we can never not communicate. So even if you just sit still quietly with someone else, you're sort of communicating, aren't you? So how can you not communicate? So even that is communicating something. And there was a kind of playwright, Paul Goodman. He wrote a book called The 9 Kinds of Silence. And I was like, what do you mean 9 kinds of silence? And I started to think about my life. Oh yeah, that other day I was silent, that was resentment. That other night I was silent, that was anger. So even in our silence, we can communicate, or silence of happiness, or silence of joy. We know that ourselves. So even in when we're not even using words, we're still communicating. And it's really important then, I remember doing some talks in the different services here, especially on the addiction team, we would do like a family day, and I did some other talks on communication, and I kept using the word, we need to communicate more. And I remember patients would say, we are communicating. And I realized, yes, we're all communicating. Maybe the difference is between healthy and unhealthy communication. So healthy communication that we saw with the mum and the baby there builds understanding and connection. That's really what, if we feel in our relationships there's an understanding and a connecting, that's usually a sign that communication is kind of healthy and going well. Unhealthy communication, I think it brings confusion. Often we're told mixed messages, we're not quite sure, and it kind of stresses us out, or it just brings hurt. Unhealthy communication can be very hurtful. It can be name calling. That's not healthy communication. Or else it can create a distance. It's like we try to communicate, both sides are trying, and we're just out of sync, and it can just create a bit of distance. And I'll be kind of talking about that as well. So obviously, of course, I'll be looking at that healthy communication, but acknowledging the unhealthy communication as well. We also know mental health, stress and communication, all these are interacting. We know that stress and unhealthy communication is a massive kind of piece, but it kind of what I call bidirectional. So in stressful situations, we know with a lot of mental health diagnoses, it's the person's, their capacity to express and to communicate gets affected. And that kind of can lead to kind of unhealthy communication because no one really knows what's going on. And vice versa, though, we also know that unhealthy communication can lead to a lot of stress and difficulties too. And the reverse is there. I used to do it. I was trained in a specific approach for severe mental illness, helping families communicate better. And a lot of the tasks I would do was give these handouts to these families. I used to, when I was in HC, would visit them in the homes on the community, and then in here they'd come into my office, and we'd learn actual communication skills. I used to think, is this going to really work? But over weeks and weeks, families would say, the atmosphere's changed in our home. We're starting to kind of hear each other more. Yes, there's still stress. Yes, the illness is still troubling at times, but we're hearing each other more, and the stress level is so much more reduced. They've done some impressive research on how that actually can reduce relapses of certain mental illnesses through healthy communication. I'm going to just change gear for a second, though, and just talk a little bit about family relationships, and then bring us back to communication. I think one of the key things I want to talk, I remember I think it was at a talk, someone said to me, "Oh, Scott, family relationships, they're troublesome and dynamic." I was like, that's a bit negative. They can also be fulfilling and supportive, but I think the word I got away from is that relationships change. They always change. So you can see here that there's always these transitions, this simple picture, this simple slide of a couple in love, the romantic part. That's a relationship, but that relationship can suddenly change when you get married. Oh, there's the real person comes out then, and changes happen. When you have your first kid, it's massive. They've done research on it that actually the happiness in a relationship does drop. So any warnings of any people looking for having kids, the relationship, but you have to find new ways of kind of working as parents as well as protecting your relationship. But we have this other person in our lives too. When you have 2 kids, we need more kids. And then when those kids become adolescents, when kids become adults, when you become grandparents, all these things mean that the relationship constantly changes. And what I've noticed often in working with people with challenging mental health difficulties, yes, the doctors and the psychiatrists will have their diagnosis. As a social worker, and probably similar to Orla as an OT, we would often look at kind of the broader picture as well, the lifestyle changes. And often I notice that the different transitions in the relationships often cause stress. I remember talking to a lady who all her life, her mental health wasn't a problem. And then when she retired, she just really struggled. She couldn't figure out that relationship. I often work with couples, and many of the couples I work with, it's the retirement that really struggles. They have to figure out how to do the relationship. Or couples when they have their first baby, or couples when they've just got married. There's these transitions are really tricky because you have to sort of find change. And how do you change how do you change well is basic communication. You see, communication is kind of like a dance, I suppose. I know that sounds not like the way I dance, but like professional dancers, there's certain dances. And dancing is kind of like a give or take. One person comes in, one person comes out. One person listens, one person talks. One person sort of needs help, and the other person gets the help. Sometimes persons will stumble and fall and the moves will go wrong, but they're all trying to figure out this kind of coordinating of the relationship, just like that mum and the baby earlier on. But what happens is when the music changes and you have to learn a new dance, and that's what relationships do. When relationships change, you have to use a new dance. So when you're in a relationship with somebody, you have to use, like I was working with, just even today, I was with a mother and her 22-year-old daughter who's had some difficulties with her mental health, but doing really well now. And they were trying to figure out how do they have a new relationship now that she's got better, well, she's getting better, and also now that she's an adult. And it was interesting because the mother was finding it, you're still very snappy to me. And the mother was saying, and the daughter was saying, yeah, but you're still giving me advice. It was almost like they had this sort of teenage relationship. So they were trying to learn a new way, because now they're sort of change, a new way of kind of dancing, of communicating. And so part of communication was really hearing one another, different expectations and different roles. So the music is the relationship, and the music changes all the time. So and we all know that, but it's sometimes really good because we sometimes just have this idea that we just keep doing the same thing, the same strategies in our relationships. But even as the relationships change, we have to remember there are new dance moves to learn as we go on in our lives with all the different relationships. And I often see that as well with one maybe partner who's got mental health difficulties, and maybe the family or the carer. So that's a new dance. And then they have to, as the person gets well, they have to learn a new way of doing things. Like, maybe that person can make their decisions for themselves now. So all the time finding that way of changing. Another example, I'm a parent of 2 young kids, so this, for parents, this might be relevant. This has been really helpful for me. These are very arbitrary transitions of children. They vary, of course, through age, but roughly, give or take, there's a 0 to 4 gap, there's a 5 to 10, 11 to 18, and an 18 plus. Maybe it should be like a 25 plus, as I'm hearing more and more children are taking longer to become adults. But roughly, and what I suppose a parent has to learn, they have to be different parent for each of these stages. So in the 0 to 4, you have to be quite a director, and you have to do this, don't do that, and it's very kind of directing. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Don't touch the fire. Don't run away there. Don't run across the road. Don't hit your sister. It's very much this approach. But then you have to change that approach, because if you keep doing that, you're going to just wear everyone out. Then you have to move to a kind of training approach. So hopefully they've got it's more like you don't want to do everything for them. I'm trying to learn this with my kids now. I don't want to I have to teach them how to do the dishwasher. I thought dishwashing is really easy, but actually they need to be really helped. They put it wrong ways. They don't like getting their fingers sticky, and they're just chucking them in, and it's so much easier for me just to do it. But actually, I got to find a way of training them to do that. I can't just keep doing them. And sometimes parents can get mixed up with that, and they can keep doing the doing. Because what happens next is the teenage years. And if you haven't done the training, you're going to have to move to a coaching level. And what I find with this sometimes when I'm talking to families and parents, this can be tricky. So the difference between training and coaching is, if you think about it, if you're into sport, a trainer, you're right with them, you're kind of quite close with them in their space, and you're kind of like, do this, do that, do this, that's great. But if you think about a coach, it depends on the coaches, but they're generally on the sideline, letting the person play the sport, play the tennis, play the football. You're shouting out a few instructions, but you're letting them get on with it. So you're giving them more space. You might give them a halftime team talk. You might give them a chat afterwards, but it's more space. It's challenging. And the aim, I suppose, is, and I might be 25 plus, I don't know, but it's made, then you get to the friendship stage. And when I work with parents sometimes and children, especially with parents, is that what can sometimes happen is they can get the children will always move through the stages. They'll do that. But the problem is parents don't always move through the stages either. So I remember working with, a parent who really was working with their teenage daughter, but he was still in the training stage. They're not going to listen to you. You're barely going to get any kind of listening at that stage. But if you get the training done earlier on, hopefully they'll have those things. Likewise, I've seen parents try and be friends with their 5-year-old, and that's the wrong stage to do it. And likewise, I remember talking to a family member, and they found it really hard as a person in their late 30s that their father was still training them. It was like, and it created a disconnection. No, I want my father to be a friend now that we can. So again, it's learning this dance, and that's just an example. There's lots of different examples through relationship stages, through sibling stages, to all these things. It's getting the right coordination, just like that mother and baby, getting the right coordination. Hope that kind of makes sense to you guys. So what makes family relationships work? Balance is the key word here. So another thing like that they've done a lot of research is like what makes family relationships function better. It's not necessarily a moral thing, what's a good family versus a bad family, but they're more interested, what's kind of a healthy, functioning family? What are the kind of dynamics that make it work? And they would have done loads of research on this. And they usually talk about 2 main things, but the key word is balance in this. So the first thing, they talk about flexibility in your relationships. And this is crucial. I suppose it's getting the balance between the two. So you have some families are very, very flexible. So flexible, in fact, that it could be quite chaotic. Sure, we'll do whatever we want. We're very spontaneous. We might have dinner on our laps tonight. We might chat this way. We might do that way. I might discipline this way. We'll do something this way. And it's great, the spontaneity, but too much of that can be not great. On the other side, you can have families that are very structured, which is great. Everyone knows what they're doing. But it can be so structured, it can be rigid and strong. And I was even looking at the wind last night with the trees, and we were looking at it with my kids, and the fact that the branches and the trees we were looking at it, there was a level, they were strong, there was a structure to it, but there was also flexibility to it, so it could move with the wind, with the challenges. But if it was like so strong and with no flexibility, they would break. And so it's those two extremes of that kind of rigid and that chaotic. So really the kind of, what the research says around family relationships is trying to have that capacity to be flexible. Yes, to have structure, so important in family relationships, in any relationships. Expectations, what in any relationships, not just parent-child, in a long-term couple relationship, in sibling relationships, and good friendships. If you didn't know how this person react, you wouldn't know what's going on. So having that level of flexibility is so important. The other kind of one is connectedness. And this is kind of like, again, the two tensions between being so independent in your relationships. It's like, no, like it's just about, I just want my kids, or I just want my partner to be independent, get on with it. And it can be too an extreme that everyone's just very disconnected and not really having a close relationship. And then the other extreme is what we kind of use the word enmeshed. Have you heard that kind of word? So it's this idea that relationships are so close that there's no sense of, what's my view on this? I only go with my partner's view. I only go with my siblings. I don't even know what my view is. But it's the right time and the right place. So if you think about a parent, like a mother and a child, like a baby, that's a enmeshed relationship. That's perfectly appropriate. So again, it's this flexibility and this balance to move through the different stages of a relationship, to move between those things. There's a lot of kind of more we can talk about that, but they're the kind of main kind of things to think about relationships. So what makes relationships work? It's balance, it's knowing the different transitions in our life, things change, and it's learning that you're going to have to keep learning new dance moves as you go along in your life, new ways of relating to one another. So the final part, which I spent a bit more time, is just looking at some communication principles. And here are 5, and I've put a C in front of all of them, just so hopefully we can remember them. So some of them I've kind of forced a bit, you could kind of see. When I talk about care, it's more about listening, but hopefully it's a way of kind of remembering this. So we'll go through each of these as I get a sense of kind of what are we really talking about when we talk about communication. The first one, to be clear, I read this quote one time I wonder what you guys think of it, in a book on communication. And the author said, Susan Campbell, 90% of communication is about control. And when I first read that, I was thinking, this is a bit harsh, like that's quite high. Does she think that most of my communication is about control? And I started to kind of think about my interactions and some of the things I would do. So sometimes I would just be nice or agreeable to avoid hassle. Often I would keep silent to avoid conflict. Often I would play it safe, try not to rock the boat. Sometimes I would try to impress or appear fine, or trying to get what I want in a sort of roundabout way. The other day, and hopefully they'll do some more, I don't know if anyone knows any studies on WhatsApp family groups. It's a very interesting way of communicating. So I have my mother's 70th birthday coming up, and we're trying to organise a nice fancy dinner out with them. My elder brother, who's a bit more well off than me, booked a lovely fancy restaurant, and I just didn't really see the message. That's great because he did all the job. And then as I began to look at the prices, I was like, oh no. But being nice and agreeable, I didn't say anything, but I just gave out to my wife about it and gave out lots and didn't say anything. And the more frustrated I got. So then I remember I was doing this talk in communication, and I remember I was writing this up. I was like, Jenny, I need to be a bit more open here. Because what I was really doing, I was sort of controlling maybe what he thought of me, I didn't want to have any conflict. And this writer, Susan Campbell, is really saying, look, it can be really risky, but it can be very much better about connecting. So then I said, I texted, and my sister's involved, and you're just wondering who's there. So I opened up, it's just a bit steep. And then actually, thankfully, my sister threw in and said, I can't do it either. And but I won't go into the details, but actually it opened up a very helpful conversation, which is quite a rare on a WhatsApp family group. But we were able to talk it through. But my learning from that was, look, maybe a lot of my communication is about control. Maybe it's a bit like a chess player. You're kind of, whoever plays chess, I can't really play chess, but I know like you're not really thinking about your move, you're thinking about the other person's move, and then you'll say that. So it's very common, like when I work with adolescents and mental health, that one of the big things that really helps adolescents is that they feel they can express and talk about their difficulties. And often they end up not being great talkers. And when I explore that with them, because that's going to be really protective from that, they could talk to their parents or their caregiver, they often say, oh, I don't want to say anything to them. So why not? Well, I don't want to worry, so I just say I'm fine. Or I don't want them, if I tell them, there might be something that'll happen to me. And they have lots of different reasons. So again, we try to create spaces for them to be open and to be clear. And it can be very vulnerable, but it can be very powerful when I'm in a meeting with a young person to say, look, I don't want to say anything to you, Mum, because I'm afraid that you'll get really worried. And Mum says, actually, I can tell that you're not well, but you're sort of saying, I say you're fine. And we all say as Irish people, or I think all people really, yeah, I'm grand, even though we're not. And but you can tell by the body language, the person's not grand. So it's very kind of confusing and stressful, and it's really not clear in the communication. So parents often say, I'd rather have the known worry than the unknown worry. Now that you tell me what's wrong, we can talk about it, and actually creates relief. And the young person's like, what? So me telling you I'm depressed, or me telling these things is actually a relief to you. It's like, yeah, of course, like it's sad and worrying at one level, but it's a relief because I could tell it, and now you're talking to me. And it's often this openness is so important. So it's really important to be kind of open as well. And it's not really just, so how open are we willing to be in our relationships? And of course, some relationships, we have to be very careful. They can be quite vulnerable, and we have to hold our boundaries, of course. But in our close relationships, if we want that connection, if we want them to understand us, it's so important to be clear. But we kind of, I suppose, we give kind of mixed messages. You know, there was an example when my wife was, very busy, and I remember just I just threw a comment at her saying, "Oh, you've been really busy lately, haven't you?" And just walked away. What does she do with that comment? And actually, I wasn't being quite clear with what I was saying. She could have gone away with a bit confused. She could have been, is this a criticism? Is he saying that I shouldn't be busy? Or is it praise? Is he saying that it's great you're really busy? Or is he making me guilty for being busy? Come on now, women's liberation. I'm supposed to work lots here, and I don't know what's going on here. So actually, what I was trying to say to her, which I wasn't very clear, was I could do with spending a bit more time together, But but by saying that, I'd be worried that if I said that, what if she said no? Or I don't even know why I was sort of worried about that. So again, we seem to get caught up a lot of the time of not being clear in our communication. But it can also be very positive communication. I remember working with a couple, and a relationship was struggling. And one of the things was the man, and often is the men, but it can be when too. The man would keep everything inside, and so he had this great plan that he was going to take his wife out for a date, and we've been working on this. And I think he got a voucher or something, and he was going to do this, and he was very excited by it. But he said, "I'm not going to tell my wife until I get everything organised in my head. I'm going to do this, do this, do this," and then like at the last minute, it didn't work out. And he didn't say anything to her. So she had no idea that this was happening. And I was trying to encourage him to show all your work. Like show her that you were thinking of her. Show her this. Like, what's the point? And the wife was saying, that would mean a lot to me. I just thought through your silence that you weren't thinking of me at all. You weren't being clear or open about this. And one of the other things we do often with families, those skills I was telling you earlier, one of the first skills we get families to do is express appreciation to one another. And it's really awkward. It's like, this is like American family type thing. It's like, no, you just literally say, thanks for washing up. That took a lot of stress. And we get them all examples, and we get them homework. They have to do it for a week or two until they see me again. And they say, amazing, it just changes the atmosphere. So even positive things we can be open about. But obviously, there's challenging things we can be clear about, but there's a lot of things we can do to be open in our communication, to be clear in our communication that can really help in healthy relationships. Some kind of phrases that are quite helpful. So be open with your thoughts. I was thinking to myself that it'd be great to hang out sometime, but I'm just trying to work out the logistics. That would be a very helpful thing to say that person did. Letting the person in on your mind so they're not trying to guess or judge. Be clear on your feelings and share. Now, it's a real classic cliche thing. Hearing you say that, I feel. But what's really helpful with that is, so often when someone gives you a difficult, maybe a criticism, like I'm really angry or really disappointed that you weren't there for me today, or really frustrated, most of our reactions will we kind of go, well, let me tell you something about you. We go on the defensive. So this phrase has helped me so many times because it just gives me that 2 or 3 seconds. Hearing you say that, I feel. So it just slows it down, and it's very effective because what it does, it sort of goes, okay, how am I feeling? Okay, hearing you say that, I feel a bit bad, or I feel a bit attacked. And then the other person goes, oh, and it kind of stops them from going in the attack. So it just slows it down. It can be a really helpful thing. And then often I create spaces for families to say it to each other. So hearing you say that, I feel attacked. Well, hearing you say that, I feel guilty. Well, hearing you say that, I feel bad that you feel guilty. But it gets to a point where it's much more calmer and you're clear in how you're feeling. The often thing I say is like, be open with dilemmas. A lot of the time, there's a lot of dilemmas going on. We don't share them. So hearing you say that, I'm thinking on the one hand is a great phrase. It gives you time to think of the other hand as well. But, parent with a teenager, oh, Mum, can I go out and stay up late tonight? It's Saturday. Oh, well, hearing you say that on the one hand, that's great to see you want to go out with friends. But on the other hand, I'm just worried for your safety. So you're just letting them know what they're going, no, you're not going out. It's just sort of giving that time, and then they know you're thinking and know your concerns. So they're just a few. There's lots of ideas about what it means to be clear in these things. So be clear. The second one is be calm. Another relational expert, Terry Real, says, when we are upset, the rational parts of our brain don't work well. I think we go, calmness is necessary to listen fully, understand, and respond with empathy. So there was this experiment that I think it was called the Gottman Institute, which are sort of relationship couple experts in America. And they did this experiment where they put couples on a heart monitor, and they got them to talk about conflictual things or difficult things. And they noticed what would happen is when the heart rate went over 100, the conflict got a lot worse. Name calling was said, people were shouting. And then when the heart rate went below 100, things got calm again. And then other studies started to figure out what this is going on here is that we have this brain that's made up of generally 3 parts. And, scientists would say that this kind of evolves. So we have our lizard brain, which is the red one there. We have our mammal brain, and we have our human brain, the neocortex. So our lizard brain is the kind of fight or flight. It's that reaction. It's also the brain that kind of controls things that we don't even think about. It controls like a heart rate. It controls things that we're not choosing to do. It keeps those things going. It's kind of like that autopilot thing. Our mammal brain is a bit more advanced, but it's very emotional, and it has memories and habits, so it goes there. And then the top part of our brain, our neocortex, this is our rational brain also, where we can have empathy and we can kind of see a different perspective. Now, what happens when the heart rate goes up? They've noticed that the blood pressure from the top of the brain, the thinking part, flows all the way down to the lizard brain. So what happens when two people so at the start you're having a good conversation, you feel safe and you're listening to one another. The blues are two blues, let's say it's 2 people talking. And then when difficulty things come up, we feel a bit threat. All of a sudden we get to the purple or we get to the red, and then things just blow up. So what's really important, a lot of research has done that for relationships, is to be calm. That's healthy communication. It's really important. And they've done lots of studies on this. So this ability to do practices. We often tell our 2-year-olds or tell 2-year-olds to go away, go to your naughty step. But I often think that's what we as adults should do as well, whatever that looks like. It's to pause and go, oh, I'm really triggered here. Oh, I'm just getting really mad here. And actually just acknowledge it is almost the most important thing. I remember I was doing a parenting course and being trained in a parenting course, Parenting Plus, excellent course. And that was our one big take home they would say to parents. When your teenagers are frustrating or things are frustrating, the big thing is just stop. And often parents would have to go away, and that would be their one piece of homework. And the amount of effectiveness that would be, I know it sounds so simple, but when we're getting very triggered, we're not fully thinking. How many times I do it so often when I regret, why did I say that? That was really unhelpful, because that wasn't the cerebral cortex wasn't kicking in there. Breathing is so important as well. That lowers your heart rate when you do breathe. So once the heart rate goes down, the blood pressure kicks back in, and you can think more as well. So even those phrases, hearing you say that, I feel a bit triggered here, just give me a minute. And they've done studies. They've done couple work, and because I know I'm coping couples a lot, but I'm sure it's the same with other relationships. To step away, even take 50 minutes, and to come back can be very effective. Of course, you need to communicate that. That can rile someone up even more. You're triggering me. I'm off. What? You come back here, and then you find couples that are chasing each other around the house. Give me space. No, you're not listening to me. So obviously, it's a kind of joint thing. Let's just both step away for a while. It can be really important. Another phrase I've heard called name to tame. It's this idea that if you can name our emotions, we can tame them. So if you can actually name, this is anger, or this is disappointment, or actually this is jealousy. I'm jealous that work's taken up all this time and I wanted to spend time with you. Even naming it kind of takes a lot of the power off it as well. So be clear in our communication and be calm. I think if there was just those two, that we'd be doing really well in our healthy communication. Care. I suppose there's a famous guy who wrote, I think, The 7 Habits to a Highly Effective Person. He said this: seek first to understand, then to be understood. So it's all about that empathy. And care is all about that kind of listening, but it's more than just listening. I think it's about care. It's about, do I actually care for this person? Do I care about this relationship? Because if you do, you probably will listen more. But if you don't really care, you're probably not going to give the attention it deserves. So it is active listening, which isn't just doing something else while the person's talking and saying you're kind of listening. It's actually engaging, really listening, not just in the words, but noticing the body posture. And it takes a lot of energy, but it's really important in healthy communication. It's using your you're listening, but your eyes, and also some of their physical. It's just real active listening. And it's really important when we're listening. I often it's listening to understand, not listening to respond. I find most of the time when I'm listening, it's like, okay, actually, I don't agree with that. I'm going to get my point in when they stop. Now I'll get my point in. Well, actually listening is kind of saying, I'm just going to actually even, and the hardest thing, but it's very effective if you can, if you can do it even 10% of the time, especially when you don't agree with the person. Obviously, this is a close relationship. So I'm kind of caring for this person. I don't really agree with them, but I'm going to just try and listen, get into their world because I care for them. So I'm going to listen to them, understand them. And then you can give your response, but first seek to understand. And again, amazing how when you do that, from my experience professionally and personally, how the tension decreases and actually you get a bit of clarity. It's actually, no, it's not about that. It's about this. And actually when the person feels a lot more understood, things are a lot more calmer. And then they're more receptive to hear your point of view, which is could be completely different. So yeah, listening does not mean agreeing, but it's so they're really important things, because when I try and do this skill with families and stuff, they often think it's about agreeing or it's about a debate. That's a different type of, engagement, and that's perfectly fine too. But for the listening, the caring part is listening to respond. So it's a really good question to ask ourselves. Are you caring more for what is being said than the person saying it? Sometimes I find that with my young kids, they could be waffling on about something that I'm not interested in. But I'm kind of thinking, actually, it's really important for them. So I'm going to make an effort for the next 5 minutes to actively listen, and then hopefully I can move on from that. Or sometimes what I ask when in my professional work where with a couple, I sometimes ask if the spouses or partners are really in not a great place and they really are struggling even to care for one another, I often try to get someone to say maybe some of their hurts and ask the other person, sort of set it up. So I need you to use your imagination and pretend you're not the husband or wife or partner, you're their best friend, okay? Just imagine you're their best friend, okay? So that's what you do, okay? Now you talk as if you're talking to your best friend and listen as if you're your best friend. And that can actually be quite interesting because you're listening in a slightly different way, you're listening in a caring way. And again, that can be very interesting and insightful, I suppose. Last few. Clarify. Yeah, so I think it's Bernard Shaw, said this: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has taken place. And I think it's, I was talking to a friend who gave me that quote, and I remember that. I think it's great. It's so true. I think when communication is vague or paradoxical, like contradicting, so if the communication is it's they're saying, oh, how are you feeling? Yeah, I'm grand. It kind of it's kind of hard to understand. Or if a family member says, look, don't come home too late, I would say that's probably a little bit vague. What's too late? One person goes, oh, they mean too late. They mean 12 a.m. at night, where the person saying it might mean 9 p.m. So both sides think they've heard. They both think that communication has happened and everyone's happy until 9:30, 10. Why is this person not home? Oh, you said you wouldn't be home late. Yeah, I'm not home late, So it's so helpful to clarify, but it's really interesting. Sometimes I talk when relationships are distressed, I use the phrase, you got to over communicate, double check, triple check. It's so important in the workplace, isn't it, this as well? Scott, will you do this talk? Yeah, sure. But maybe if there's nothing else, and thankfully Helen gave me loads of information and I was able to clarify anything like that. So it's so important because both sides could think actually communication's happened where it hasn't happened. Yeah, and it can be kind of strange, sometimes you might go, oh yeah, don't worry about me, you go off and enjoy yourself. It's kind of like, what do you do with that? It's not clear. Do we need to clarify, are you happy for me to go or are you annoyed? So again, it's so important to have that clarifying. The final thing is context. So it's kind of where and when healthy communication happens. So when do you have difficult conversation, the right time for conversations? Is the rest, if you had something to bring up with a close family member, when is the right time? When's the wrong time? Is it as soon as they come home from work? Probably not. Is it when they're just about to go to sleep? I don't know about you, but we all have different personalities, and some people the only time they chat is late at night, and it's the worst thing for someone else, and then the other person, it's in the morning. But trying to find a mutual time to talk for those difficult conversations, it's really important. It's really interesting with adolescents, they seem to either want to talk in the car, that's often a good way. Well, I think parents like that because they're kind of captured audience, so it can go either way. They either don't talk or they willing to talk a little bit if they know the longer journey. Or often they like to talk late at night when the parents are trying to go to bed. I always wondered about that, and there's a few theories. One is that adolescents love autonomy, so it's like, oh, I can talk, but I know my mum and dad are going to be so tired. I can end the conversation whenever I want to. So it's kind of like, so it is, and then maybe that is the best time, or I have younger kids when they love talking, late, going to bed, but they kind of, they know if I tell Dad something really interesting or important, he'll stay and I'll get to stay up longer as well. So there's all these kind of ways, but it's about couples, relationships, families. It's really important to find the right time. Walking can be really excellent. A certain space you might notice in your home. Maybe there's a certain space that's really helpful to talk about difficult conversations. And sometimes it's really important to think about that as well. The final thing was just about relationship. Because we all have a history in our relationships. And the relationships itself will determine a lot of how we communicate with one another. The psychologists put up this idea of, it's a very fancy phrase, but it's this kind of thing called positive sentiment override or negative sentiment override. So think of the word override, it's overriding whatever's there. And the idea is that when we're in a good place in a relationship, we will give the other person the benefit of the doubt. So when we're in a good relationship and they forget to bring the bins out, like that happens to me sometimes, I'm always the one doing the bins, that if I'm in a good space, in a relationship, it's a good place, my partner might just assume, oh, he forgot. But if a relationship isn't in a great place, so that's positive sentiment override, a sort of a behaviour, Scott didn't put the bins out. If the context of the relationship will kind of override that thing and just presume, benefit of the doubt, he just forgot, he's still fine. If we've had lots of arguments and the relationship isn't so good, I bet he did that on purpose to annoy me. I bet he didn't, and that's what they call a negative sentiment override. So it overrides that. So we have our kind of interactions, but we also have this relationship that kind of will interpret those behaviours. Does that kind of make sense? So what we have to realise, there's a context in relationships. So we could have relationships that are very healthy and going well. If the relationships that are really tricky and there's maybe unresolved conflict or really difficult things in the past. So even if we do something positive, it's interpreted as a negative or not seen. I know a lot of the work sometimes I would do when I was in the addiction team is when the person in addiction is getting into good recovery and doing quite well. There's still a kind of suspicion, there's still a kind of automatic response. Like I know, remember their partners would tell me sometimes, they'd say, oh, I'm just going out to see some friends. And they would be so, oh, no. The negative sentiment would override that and go, they're not just going out with friends, they're going out drinking or they're going out doing something terrible. But it's amazing as over time, it's like a bank account, as the positive interactions sort of fill up that bank account, it kind of sort of switches into positive override. It kind of goes, oh no, because the last 10 times the person went out, everything was fine. So yeah, go and enjoy yourself. So it's just recognize that relationship as a context as well to these things. So, in conclusion, good timing, that's great. Just a few things. Developing healthy communication is a lifelong process of mastering. It's something that no one is really an expert in. We can all talk the talk like me up here, but I'm still learning. But different relationships will bring up different things for us as well. But I really would encourage like those skills, those C's I was saying, to try it out, to look at them. You can Google them, you can read about them. It can be very helpful. And healthy communication is one of the most important factors, I'd say, in creating relationships that are lasting, fulfilling and resilient. So life's not all happy, but relationships in the face of life's challenges. And yeah, really don't, if there's one message, not underestimate the power of healthy communication in your relationships. It can really make a big changes and really help bolster it as well. There was, I'll leave you with this, there was a landmark study, it's the Harvard study of adult development. It's a cool study, I can't remember how many adults, they traced them from when they're about 10 all the way up. I think they're all in their 80s and 90s, so they traced these for the whole 75 years. And they found that the quality of relationship was a key factor in determining long-term health and longevity. And those with strong, supportive relationships lived longer and had better health than those with weaker social ties. And I propose that good, healthy communication is a big factor in that. So thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott. That was very enlightening, I have to say. I don't know about any of you, but I know for myself, there was a lot that I could relate to in my own life. And I was actually smiling. You were talking about the transition to friendship. My friend was telling me a story. We were chatting the other day, and her son, who's kind of in his 20s, they're kind of moving into the friendship space. He was in college, came home about 2 o'clock, said he'd be home early. So she was obviously up waiting. When he came home, his dad had just gone to the bathroom, so he stuck his head in the door and said, I'm just letting you know I'm home. And they were like, oh, right, okay. And I was like, okay, well, at least he's home now. We'll talk about it in the morning. And then saw that they were awake, so came bounding in to sit on the bed and have the conversation. And they're like, what are you doing? And he's rattling away. Obviously, he'd had a few, and they're kind of looking going, could you just go to bed now? But ended up, what he wanted to tell them was he's actually got himself a new girlfriend. But it was like, we're in the friendship phase, but hasn't quite got the boundaries to it yet. They were like, just go to bed. So I like that kind of timing. There's a time and a place. So listen, we're going to stop now and give people a little break. And there's a piece of paper on the chairs there if you've got any questions that you would like to ask Scott. So what Scott's going to do is just going to take a little breather in there. We'll gather up the questions that you have and then we'll come back and do the responding to the Q&A. Is that okay? Super, lovely. We'll see you on the other side.
I should have asked at the end of my talk just easy questions, but I forgot to mention
No, you
that.
forgot that, believe
me.
me. What we've done is we've kind of put them together with similar themes. And obviously we can't speak to particularly personal situations, so we're kind of clumping the ones that are together with general themes. So I suppose the first one is how best to keep the lines of communication and connection in a situation where the other person is reluctant, be it a teenager or an adult or a fraught relationship. So I suppose there's put three in there, so maybe start to the teenager first.
Yeah, and I think it's a point I made earlier, it does take at least two to communicate well. And I think the real challenge, isn't it, when you might be wanting to kind of open lines of communication and connect and the other person or people aren't, and it is a real challenge. And I suppose there's levels of challenge from kind of a level that, so like an extreme level would be where you would need professional help to open up those lines of communication. But something like a teenager, one of the things I often have as a philosophy is you got to meet somebody not where you want them to be, but meet them where they're at. So it's kind of linking with them. So like teenagers are interesting because their brain is forming, and one of the parts of their brain is telling them I suppose it's the idea with teenagers that like they get all their comforts and they're looked after at home, and then evolutionarily the body's trying to get, you need to be independent, you need to get out of the safety and go for things. So that's why teenagers are more they take more risks. But the other one is that they begin to sort of detach a little bit from parents because they have to kind of grow, and so it's a kind of, you're up against biology there. But I know with teenagers, I think it's really important for parents or caregivers of teenagers is to meet with the teenager where they're at. They're not going to come to you, so try to enter into their world a bit, maybe get them to talk a little bit about what's interesting to them. If you find yourself, I don't know about you, Orla, but like with teenagers, if you keep kind of, what happened, how's school, you keep kind of filling the space, they'll just keep withdrawing. So maybe it's a bit about giving space as well. And think about like, even just reflect, and when does he talk or she talk, and what is happening to make that happen as well. But also, it's very normal in teenagers to just step away, isn't that? What do you think as well?
So it's that kind of piece about finding a common ground, a safe space, timing.
Yeah.
And then sorry, you were going to say something else?
Well, you see, and there are like, some teenagers, there are talkers and are non-talkers, and you can have talkers and they can express and be quite emotional, and you do have non-talkers as well, and that's personality-wise as well. So you do have to sort of, where's your expectation for a non-talker? If you just get a few nods and a few hellos, that's pretty good, So it's about expectations as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And coming from an adult then, moving kind of further on, do you think there's anything different that you would add to that, with the kind of, in the hope that it's a fully developed brain as we move into adulthood?
Yeah, like there's this idea of kind of psychological word called meta-communication, which is this idea of talking about the talking. And sometimes it can be a bit vulnerable just even talking about that. Look, I've noticed I'm always the one doing this, or I've noticed this pattern when I talk, you withdraw, or I notice when these things come up. So you're not really talking about anything specific, but you're so for some, if you're in a relationship where it's kind of, they can tolerate that can be quite interesting. So, and then being like, is there something about me? Is there something about me that stops you from talking, or can I do something anyway that's helpful? That'd be one first start anyway. Again, if an adult is kind of open to it.
Okay. Yeah. And I suppose that's the interesting thing that's come through in some of the questions as well. Just say the other person isn't open, and it's very fraught and it's very fractious, and it's one side wants to engage and the impression is the other side is really not for engaging, and there's a lot at stake.
Yeah, no, that's extremely challenging. I'd say as well, the person that's not talking, they're communicating something. Not talking in that way or not communicating, even though what I'd say is quite controlling, because when you're putting the other person in quite a vulnerable position, because you're not sort of you're putting kind of doubt and confusion, and sometimes the silent people or people that are not engaging are quite controlling. I know sometimes in my work, sometimes you do need professional help, mediation or bringing in. So if the relationship isn't so fraught but a bit fraught, but still not really connecting, or if you're worried about what reactions are going to happen, I would, like a therapeutic space, a space with someone like myself, yourself, Orla, or other professionals where that can happen. It can be very challenging when someone is just completely not talking. I suppose that's where I'd go down as kind of mediation route, a professional kind of route to try to sort of figure that out. Like it's often sometimes as well in breakup relationships, there's lawyers, solicitors all get involved as well, which is a really shame, but someone is there at the roots as well. That can happen. It's very difficult.
And I suppose it's interesting to realise that there is always some sort of an intervention. However far down the line you go, whether it's, managing it yourselves or going, having to engage in therapy that will be really freeing up and liberating, or mediation when actually, you really need to kind of bring out the heavy guns. But there is still options. Yeah, that's right. And sometimes you can have a mutual kind of friend as well as that kind of first tier as well, that they can come in as well and help a little bit too. That can be helpful. Okay, thanks very much for that. Our other one then is how to connect with siblings after a death of a parent. Do you know that piece? Or after bereavement or great loss, how to reconnect when something has kind of thrown everybody apart.
Yeah. Like siblings are such an important relationship. It's probably your longest relationship you'll ever have is with your sibling. A little bit like I was saying earlier, the context, there's so much relational history. Maybe it's positive override or negative override. So I think crisis can bring opportunity. But also, isn't that what the Chinese say? It's both, the Chinese crisis is both opportunity and danger. So it can bring opportunity to find ways of connecting, but also people are very vulnerable, especially with a bereavement, isn't it? You were kind of saying that to me just in there as well, wasn't it?
There's that piece, I think, as well. Sometimes, depending on belief systems, there's always some sort of follow-up ceremony after somebody has passed, and sometimes what we can do is jump into that space. whether it's a month's mind or a kind of a remembrance ceremony, and people can think maybe that's the opportunity to have the chat, when actually that's grieving space still. So it's not the time to do any of those other sidebars, if you like. It's let the grieving be in the grieving and bereavement space. Let the other conversations be in a different space and at a different time. And then I suppose it would follow all the principles that you had said before, picking your time.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
you had mentioned as well about finding maybe there's one sibling that you have a kind of a better relationship with others, and maybe you start to build the circle, if you like. But it takes time to let the grieving happen first, and then the communication.
And grieving is complicated because everyone grieves differently, different relationships. So there's that sensitivity there. But I think again, if that clear communication, that caring piece, and again meeting the person where they're at, not where you want them. So just starting very gently and slowly. Yeah, but it is a real good opportunity as well. And sibling relationships, full of competitiveness in the early years. But challenges. Siblings see the worst each other and things like that. But there's also such great strength and history there, and it's really definitely worth a relationship fighting for if you can, if it's healthy, and if there's opportunities there. Yeah.
Okay, and then I suppose the other bit is once you've taken the step to be brave and courageous and actually communicate maybe things that you've kind of been storing up, what happens if you're actually afraid of the consequences or the reaction you're going to get on that stage?
Yeah, as I said, there's a reason why most of our communication is about control, because we're worried about the other person's reaction. I suppose, there's levels to that. I do think we got to, sometimes I found it's not in the, you can have a certain level of relationship where it's all fine and dandy, but I always say to relationships when they break down, if you can find a way of repairing the relationship, you're actually nearly in a better place than when everything was fine, because you've gone to a deeper level of connection and risk taking. And there's always going to be a level of risk. I suppose it's just balancing. If you're in a relationship that you don't feel safe in, you've got to be careful of what you say. If you feel you're a little bit more safer, you can do that. I often will facilitate sessions here, like where there's difficult conversations that need to be had. There can be a bit of prep work with that. And I'm constantly amazed at the bravery of when families meet with me and couples meet with me, that they do talk about challenging things. And in a sort of professional space can be very helpful bringing some of that up as well. But in the smaller, minor things, I think it's worth taking some risks for the benefit of the relationship. Yeah. And
maybe as you're saying, actually making sure that you have a safe space and that there's boundaries around it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We have two more, and they're quite different. So I think we'll go with the kind of the heavy hitter first, and then finish with this one. Like both kind of heavy hitting, if you like. But how do you connect with? How did I put that one? Actually, I think I put it aside. Oh yeah. How best to communicate when actually the other person is unable to communicate, where it's broken down entirely due for physical reasons, either stroke or somebody's mute, for varying reasons, where there's some sort of a cognitive impairment. And the question actually was, is there any point?
See, there's different levels of communicating. There's the kind of interaction of exchange information. But let's say you were visiting somebody who was really incapacitated, brain injury, but just the act of visiting them is communicating something. It's communicating care. They might get a little bit of that, they may not. They might get a tiny smidgen, this person, or so that itself is communicating. So often say it's the actions are communicating. So just being there, you're communicating something there. In terms of really more than that, information can be very challenging, but I just think even starting with that is important, not to underestimate that.
Not underestimating the connection. And again, there's also, specialists, I suppose what's important to realise that in communication there's also touch. Is really profound. The last thing for any of us to lose is our hearing. And not understanding the words isn't the point, because only 7% of our communication, am I right in that, is actually the words we use. So it's actually sound that we make. A bit like the mother and the child there. They were just making sounds, but it was working. So it's that tone and the pitch, maybe a background sound. And then obviously bringing in the expertise of a speech and language therapist where they may find alternative ways for communication to be bridged would also be very important. So in those sort of extreme cases, again, getting expert help and input and guidance would be really, really important. And then our last, but by no means least question is, and I think this is very pertinent in today's world, are we overprotective of the youth today, number one? And if so, does this have a positive or negative impact on communication and managing life situations? There's a lot in that one, Scott.
Yeah, no, it's a good social commentary, yeah. I remember reading, I can't remember the name, the writer who wrote a book, I think The Anxious Generation, about teenagers and social media, and he kind of had a quote that we've, in the Western world, we've overprotected our young people out in the real world, but we've underprotected our young people in the kind of internet cyber world. I think that's really interesting, that idea, because we sort of forget, and there's the amount of young people I've seen and parents who have no idea what's going on in the internet world, and I think I would say that we've underprotected there, and then potentially then because of that we may be compensating or overprotecting. How that relates to communication, I think, I think like that care, giving time to listen. I wouldn't see that as like being a snowflake, or I think to young people. I think that's a really good thing. I think being kind and listening to young people, they're going through lots of different, like even, yeah, they're going through a lot that I haven't, I didn't experience. And whenever I talk to young people, the common thing, I know it's a cliche, but I hear it all the time, I just want the people to understand me. So the plenty of listening, communication. I don't think that's them being overprotective. I think that's just listening. There'd be some of my thoughts. It depends what overprotective means. I think it's, again, what I talked about, the right. See, I always believe the right strategy at the right time in the right way, but you could have the right strategy at the wrong time. I remember talking to a father who was saying that he reflected on that because he was quite kind of, he probably in his words, quite strict when the kid was younger, and quite kind of, you need to plough your own furrow and do this. And then he realised that was a good strategy, but it was just the wrong time. So you can't be overprotective of a baby, let's say. And I think probably sociologically, I think young people are, they're taking longer to become adults. And I also think there's a difference between chronological age and maturity age. So often ask young people what age they are and what age they feel they are. And I often ask parents, what age do you, yes, we know the chronological age, but what age do you feel the person is as well? I know with mental health difficulties, for any of us, it can kind of arrest development a bit as well. So, so they're just some reflections on that. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
I suppose it also, as you know, like you, I have children, mine are older, and it also depends on the days of the week. Definitely has a bearing, you know, and whether their team won or lost a particular match, or, you know. But I also think the other thing in communicating is asking. We run mental health first aid training here, and one of the big things that's linked with that is ask. Are you, in the talking, are we just talking and speaking to somebody, or are we actually inquiring and asking, and then leaving space for that opening? Because I think once people have space where they have to account for themselves, that sense of a kind of it being, or, you know, somebody managing, if they have space to think and to process for themselves, then you'll see if they're managing, you know, or if they're soft. And I think some of the snowflake generation that we're reflecting on, really, they are quite much more able than we think. It's just they haven't been exposed. The financial burdens are so huge that they can't move out yet. You know, that some of those stages of development have been arrested through no fault of their own, and in some instances.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, definitely.
And actually, anybody with older children will know communication then actually can be a backlog, because you have children who should have moved out, really want to have moved out, and a different time they would have moved out, but now you've got a lot of adults under one roof. We were never really designed, Scott, were we, to have lots of adults under one roof? No,
I don't think so, not at all. Boundaries, yes.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much. That's the end of our speech for today. Thank you so much, Scott, for
Thanks very
what
much.
was a really informative